There are crimes born from greed, and then there are crimes born from love twisted into hate. What began as a quiet alliance between two women seeking justice turned into one of the most chilling betrayals imaginable. Lesslie and Hayley didn't just kill a man, they dismantled the very idea of innocence itself. Behind the polished facade of ordinary lives lay a brutal conspiracy built on seduction, insurance money, and psychological manipulation. Bill's death was not the end of their torment but the beginning of something far darker, a descent into guilt, madness, and revenge that blurred the line between victim and executioner. This is not a story of who killed whom. It's a story of how two souls destroyed themselves trying to escape the shadow of one man. Lesslie once believed that people could be redeemed, that love was strong enough to wash away weakness and guilt. But every morning, when she saw Bill walk into the room with that arrogant smile and the way he looked at everyone as pawns in his private game of power, she knew it was over. Years of endurance, of false promises, of wounds hidden behind polite smiles had turned her into someone unrecognizable. She no longer loved Bill, but that didn't mean she could forget him. On the contrary, every gesture, every breath he took reminded her of everything he had taken from her: trust, peace, dignity. She had lived in Bill's shadow for too long, and now she wanted to take everything back, in the cruelest way possible. Hayley entered Leslie's life like a reflection in a cracked mirror, young, daring, and unburdened by conscience. She didn't care about right or wrong, only about the game itself. To her, Bill was not a person but an opportunity, a man sinking in debt, trying to maintain a facade of success while the walls of his empire were collapsing. Hayley saw a weakness to exploit. The massive insurance policy Bill had just signed wasn't a symbol of security, it was an open invitation. She knew Lesslie still had fragments of emotion buried beneath her anger, but that was the hook. A little pity, a few carefully chosen words, and a touch of old hatred, that was enough to turn a wounded woman into an accomplice. The plan took shape in silence, like a dark ritual. They never said it aloud, but both knew where it would lead. They studied Bill, his habits, his weaknesses, his trust. Lesslie understood that Bill would never suspect her. Despite the resentment, he believed she was incapable of cruelty. But that trust was the knife she would use. She no longer wanted to be the victim. Every step in the plan made her feel stronger, though deep inside, something fragile still trembled. Hayley was the architect. She knew Leslie's mind was fractured and easy to mold. Each word was calculated, every look rehearsed. She painted visions of a new life after Bill's death, a future free of fear, full of control, where two women could finally own their destinies. Lesslie listened and wanted to believe, but fear kept whispering. Not fear of the law, but of herself, fear that after Bill was gone, she would have nothing left. Bill, meanwhile, walked through his days unaware that his fate had already been signed. He was still playing his games, manipulating, lying, convinced of his invincibility. The life insurance policy he had taken out for security had become his death warrant. He thought of Lesslie as weak, of Hayley as a passing distraction, never realizing that they were far smarter and more ruthless than he could imagine. The night came quietly. Their preparations were perfect, the poisoned wine, the car staged for an accident, the narrative of an unexpected heart failure. Leslie's hands didn't tremble when she poured the wine. Her eyes didn't flinch as Bill raised the glass. Hayley watched from the shadows, her expression void of life. When Bill began to weaken, Lesslie felt something inside her break. It wasn't fear. It was the collapse of everything that once made her human. She wanted to stop, to scream, but Hayley's hand gripped hers tightly, reminding her that it was too late to turn back. When Bill fell, the world went silent. The ticking of the clock was the only sound left. Lesslie stood motionless, staring at the man who had been her husband, her tormentor, her obsession. She thought she would feel free, but what filled her instead was an unbearable emptiness. Hayley, calm as ever, began cleaning up the evidence with mechanical precision. Watching her, Lesslie shuddered. For the first time, she saw the truth. Hayley wasn't an ally. She was a predator, and Lesslie was her prey. The following days were a blur of silence and dread. The police ruled it an accident, the media moved on. The insurance payout was imminent. Lesslie tried to breathe again, but Hayley had changed. She was distant, cold, and now in complete control of the finances. She promised to handle everything, but Lesslie could sense the betrayal taking root. The web was tightening, and she was the one trapped. Sleep deserted her. Every night, she heard Bill's voice whispering her name, saw his reflection in the mirror, smelled the faint trace of his cologne on her clothes. She began to doubt everything, Hayley's motives, her own memories. Had this all been Hayley's plan from the beginning? Was Bill's death just the first move in a much bigger game? The thought consumed her. When she tried to access the insurance documents, she discovered that everything had been transferred, every policy, every account, every right to the money, into Hayley's name through a set of authorizations she didn't remember signing. Her hands shook as she realized that she had become nothing more than a disposable witness. One rainy night, she went to confront Hayley at her new apartment, a sleek, sterile place that reeked of success and deceit. She demanded answers, but standing in front of Hayley, she saw someone unrecognizable. Poised, elegant, untouchable. Hayley's calmness said everything. The plan had never been about partnership. It had been about elimination, from the very beginning. In that moment, Lesslie understood the full extent of her mistake. She hadn't destroyed Bill's world, she had inherited it. The cruelty, the manipulation, the hunger for control, all of it had been reborn in Hayley. She walked away into the storm, drenched and hollow, realizing that no one had truly won. The money, the revenge, the freedom, they were all illusions. The only thing left was the darkness they had created together. Weeks turned into months. Lesslie disappeared from the city without a trace. Some said she turned herself in. Others whispered that she took her own life. Hayley didn't care. She had her fortune, her power, her independence. Until the nightmares began. Each night she heard a knock on the door. The sound of pouring wine. The faint gasp before death. She tried to convince herself it was only guilt, only imagination, but guilt has a way of becoming real. In her dreams, Bill stood in the corner, smiling through the blood on his collar. When the police found Hayley's body floating in her pool months later, the case reopened. There were no suspects, no evidence, only silence. But one thing was certain, everyone who took part in that crime had paid their price. The truth was buried with Bill, but guilt lingers like a shadow that refuses to fade. Somewhere, far from the city, a woman named Lesslie was still walking alone, no longer a victim, no longer a villain, just the last survivor of a story where justice had died long before any of them did. In the end, there was no justice, no redemption, and no peace, only silence that screamed louder than any confession could. The story of Lesslie, Hayley, and Bill faded from headlines, but the echo of their choices lingered like a stain that time refused to wash away. People whispered theories, fabricated endings, and debated who the real monster was, but the truth was far simpler and far crueler. They had all been consumed by the same hunger, the same desperate need to control what could never truly belong to them. The money had changed hands, the bodies were buried, but the ghosts remained, restless, relentless, and bound to one another through the sins they could not undo. Somewhere, beyond the city lights, Lesslie still walked under the rain, her reflection fractured in every puddle, haunted by the knowledge that survival was not victory, and that sometimes living is the cruelest punishment of all.